Welcome to Talking TEAM-CBT, where you'll hear stories from therapists and clinicians around the world on their journey and experience with TEAM-CBT. Welcome, Teamsters. We have, I don't know if I should say it that way because that's a union here in Canada and I think also the US, isn't it? Today we have Dr. Angela Krumm from the Feeling Good Institute. She's a licensed psychologist in California. Welcome, Angela.
Thank you. It's so fun to be here. I feel honored that you invited me.
It's fun to have another Angela, of dueling Angelas. Just maybe to, launch off and get us started, we often ask this question first, and that is, when and how did you get involved in TEAM?
Yeah, gosh, like many folks, I kind of fell into it. I had been trained in my graduate program in pretty broad base of approaches to doing therapy and had always found cognitive therapy to be the one that made the most sense to me. But because our training was pretty broad and handling a lot of approaches as generalists, I never went very far with it. And so it was actually, I'd been quite eclectic in my approach. And I ended up doing 1 year of training on Stanford's campus at their college counseling center. And one day, a client had brought into me a book called Feeling Good. And I had heard of it and got kind of excited when he was telling me how much the book had helped him. And so I started reading it to catch up with this client, really, to realize like, oh, I was interested as well. And I got pretty excited. And then it was synchrony, came together because maybe a month or so later, I get this email from Matthew May, who many know is a psychiatrist who's trained with David Burns for many, many years. And he had gone through the same training site a few years ahead of me. And so he'd emailed the folks at our site saying, hey, if you want to come to this Tuesday evening seminar, David Burns is going to be talking about his approach. And I had to double check David Burns. Oh yeah, that's the guy who wrote this book I'm loving. Look, no way, that's amazing. It just shows how naive I was to all of it. I didn't even really know who he was. So I showed up Tuesday evening thinking it was a one-time seminar, maybe a one-time talk.
Yeah.
And at the end, he talks about his approach and it was just lovely and warm and exciting. And then he says at the end, so come back next week if you want to learn more. And I went, oh, what? And that was what is, the famous Tuesday group. Now he'd kind of opened it up to new folks. So I was excited right away. Like many people, I found it gave me methods to actually feel more helpful with my clients versus previously I felt pretty solid in my ability to connect and understand their experience and provide a really safe container for them to explore. I might have had some skills of identifying their negative thoughts. I could hear kind of self-defeating beliefs and realize that was contributing to their suffering, but I didn't really know what to do to be helpful once those were uncovered. And so the team approach, of course, opened up so many ways that I could actually help people get better versus just get support and gain insight. And there's a place for those things. I think it's lovely to have support and insight, but I was so excited to be able to also help them make changes. Yeah, so that was my intro.
Wow, that's really cool. That it just, you had that happenstance,
Yeah.
a client wanted this book and they were excited about it.
Yeah.
And you being really wanting to help your client and be congruent with what they were learning and finding effective.
Yeah.
Read it yourself. And I love that you said fell into it because I think that's going to become some kind of key code that we hear from a lot of people.
Is it?
Yeah, there's a lot of people who are like, I happened upon it. I fell into it.
Well, yeah. And I think how quickly I could have missed it, Angela, because that year there was a group of us who were trainees together, maybe 6 or 8 of us, and we had planned a dinner at one of the other trainees' homes. And it was very sweet. She'd put all this effort into making this dinner, and it was the same night of this talk. And a few of us wanted to go to the talk, and we really grappled with kind of that pull between wanting to respect the date we'd planned. And so we finally approached this friend and said, hey, we really want to go to this talk. And so she'd agreed to push back the dinner to later, but we almost didn't ask, and I'm not sure if I hadn't gone that first week, I can hope I would have come back to it. I would have seen some other invitation, but who knows, the way life moves on, you just don't always know where. So I'm so glad I took the opportunity. I did want to share a little bit about what it was like initially for me in the Tuesday group. Would that be okay to talk about? Yeah, so it's interesting because I think in TEAM, some people describe it that it can feel, I haven't heard someone say this in a while, but in the past, people would say things like it could feel a little bit like all or nothing, like you're either fully into it or not at all. And the sense that if you join a team training group and you haven't quite decided to give your whole practice over to it or fully commit, that maybe you're not welcomed. And so I like to share with folks that I actually dabbled in Team CBT for a long time before I knew if it was really right for me and before I made the commitment. And I joke it was my period of being under the radar where I was like taking what I liked. I was like not doing a ton of homework. I was like learning some and trying out a few piecemeal pieces with clients. And it actually took, I don't think Dr. Burns knew how much I was dabbling. I think he assumed I was more fully using the model. Because it took actually him saying to me, "Oh, can you help in these like small practice groups?" And when he asked me to do that, I remember my eyes getting really big, like, me? What? Why would I do that? Like, am I prepared to do that? But it actually, his asking me to step up in that way was actually a huge part of me taking the leap to dig in deeper. And I find that actually now, as I've mentored lots of colleagues who've come through the process of learning team, that they have a similar journey. I actually encourage people to dabble for a bit. I don't think it's reasonable to expect someone to give up what they've always been doing
Mm-hmm.
and just throw it out before they've had time to really decide if team is a framework that makes sense to them and that they see being effective with clients. And so I actually do try to make space in the places I teach for people to grab what they can initially. And at some point, I'll invite them to say, what would it be like to commit more fully, to use the whole model, to try the whole thing and see how much more effective it is than when you're just taking pieces. But I think that process, if you feel overwhelmed by learning all of Team CBT, I'd say, great, get excited about one piece, get excited about testing or just improving your empathy or just having a couple methods that you can use. They might not be as effective without the whole framework, but they might still be a little effective, and that's exciting too. What if we just did an invitation? So kind of helping people practice the idea that you can learn pieces of it before fully committing.
I love what you're saying because that's really how David developed this, right? He dabbled. Like he had that
Yeah,
first client, and he tried one tool and then he like, okay, now what? Now I need another one, right? And
yeah,
so that's really how it grew. So it only makes sense that we could take on that little mini experience for each one of us as we
yeah,
dabble a little bit ourselves.
right, right.
Yeah. You mentioned you're trained broad and CBT itself, the CBT part made a lot of
Mm.
sense. What about team is not so broad?
Hmm. What about team is not so broad?
Because you're talking about
Um,
how you kind of was trained in more of a broad framework
yeah.
in therapy.
Mhm. Yeah, I actually think what I yeah, my training, like many people coming through mental health training programs, was like, here's, we're going to give you an overview of, I don't know, 8, 10 different approaches, right? You learn a
Mhm.
little bit about psychodynamic, you learn a little
Right.
bit about Gestalt, you learn a little bit about CBT, and then they're kind of leaving it up to you to dig deeper and find training experiences. So because I'd come from, when I mean broad, I meant really just like brief overview. So nothing was
Right.
in depth, right? I didn't feel particularly good at anything. I felt like I knew a lot. I knew a little about a lot of things. But the beauty of team, when I think about how it stands as a framework and approach, is that it actually does allow folks to bring what they've learned from other modalities. You know this, Angela, but I'll
Mhm.
share it with the listeners that we use it as a framework to make therapy so much more effective by doing things like testing and really good empathy and agenda setting. And then we get to bring in all this knowledge we've learned from different approaches. So I, for example, love to work with um, habits and addictions. And I'm finding more and more I'm bringing in additional approaches. I just read the great book called Atomic Habits by James Cleary, and he has so much overlap with the Burns approach, but he has some add-ons, and there's no problem. I can use the team approach and
Yeah.
then add on with the methods. Similarly, I support a lot of colleagues at Feeling Good Institute who work with couples. It's not my area, I prefer to work in, but they do a great job of taking team and then adding different approaches they've learned of how to effectively work
Mhm.
with couples. And so it's this great way for therapists who come from a different background to say, hey, I want to be more effective. I'm going to use this approach, but not have to throw out any good evidence-based stuff that I've already learned along the way and can incorporate. So that's a real beauty of it.
Yeah, I mean, I myself, I know colleagues who use Gottman, a little bit of Gottman, some of the Gottman
Sure,
tools,
yeah.
and other people use EFT, is it EFT, right? Emotional focus.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
so
For
just
couples. Yeah.
integrating that in,
Yeah.
it's not a one and done. It's not like you have to become, you know, a disciple of David, so to speak, um,
Mhm.
to embrace
Right.
some of the tools that might be helpful for you.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and David models that too increasingly. I mean, sometimes I think the picture gets painted that you'd only use these things, but I think he really is open to evidence-based approaches, and that's why we keep adding to the methods. Really, what started as 50 methods now is what we say over 100, or who knows what that counts as these days, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
What's, one thing that's improved in your practice as you have embraced more and more team? Because you said you kind of dabbled
Mhm.
at the beginning. What's something that did improve?
Yeah. Oh gosh, so much. I mean, it's so long ago that I was in that dabbling place. I'm fully in now,
Yeah.
and I have been for years. I was over 15, maybe approaching 20 years ago that I was first introduced to team. But yeah, let me highlight a couple things that I would say have most improved. I think that the testing is often hard for people to understand why we would want to do testing, but it is so instrumental to helping people get better. I mean, this idea that we have as therapists that if clients keep coming back, they must be satisfied just doesn't hold very true in my experience. There was a great New York Times article years ago about this person talking about how hard it was to break up with their therapist and admitting that they ended up in therapy to process the breakup with the last therapist because it was so hard for them to admit that it wasn't helpful anymore. But they felt this sense of, well, like a combo of things, obligation to the therapist, obligation, this investment concept or some great term for that. Like once we invest a certain amount, we keep doing it because it's hard to change course when you've
Mhm.
invested time and money to something. Um, so we know that there's so many reasons people continue with therapy, or maybe they don't know what all their alternatives there are. So testing totally revolutionized my practice and helping me get real with people about is it helpful or not. And so now actually clients and I can break up very lovingly with tremendous acceptance if it's not helping them. I don't see that necessarily as a failure on either of our part, but like
Right.
a great realization that this isn't what they need. Maybe their brain works in a different way. Maybe their worldview, their cultural view is different from this idea, and this isn't connecting or clicking for them. The bottom line is the testing allows those conversations to be normalized and gives a space for them. So that's one example of a piece that I think people feel resistant to when they learn about Team CBT. Oh, I don't want to do all that testing, but that actually I think is like tremendously powerful to deepen the relationship with people and again get to more effectiveness. So we know if it's not helpful, we can talk about it. We can try to do better. We can shift things. I can take it to my awesome consultation group with Angela at Feeling Good Institute. Right? We can figure out how to do better. And if we can't do better, we can move on. So that's one example that really stands out.
Yeah. That testing, and for those listeners who don't know what that is, it's surveying before and after. But we also have other little
Yeah,
testing tools. We sometimes do a
yeah,
check-in, like what if, or excuse me, what's my
hmm
grade? And
yeah,
there's other ways to test, but this
for sure.
idea of humanizing in testing, you brought up a couple things. One is that we can't read our clients' minds. We're human,
hmm
even as
hmm
clinicians, we're still human. And so testing
Right.
helps us deal with that human side of it, but it also helps us deal with the human side that we might not always be a good fit, and that's
hmm
okay. It's that's just human behavior in relationships, and it's
hmm
I love that you said it normalizes it. Makes
Yeah.
a lot of sense to me. Um,
hmm
maybe you could give us an example of a change that team has made in either yourself or one of your
hmm
clients.
Oh gosh, so many good ones to pick from. I hmm. Yeah, asking for the examples from clients. It's like team is what I do with all my clients now, and so I could probably share a lot of stories. I'll share a personal one because I think that's probably more fun and more interesting to folks. There's probably two or three times in my life that there were big struggles that what I was learning in team really carried me through. I'll let's see, the most recent folks can listen to on one of David Burns' podcasts. I talk about a journey I went through to really change my eating and my exercise using the habit model that team offers, and really continue to feel just like great about being able to make changes in my life to be more healthy. And so folks can listen to that podcast if they want. The one I probably have shared less about was my first experience that really got me personally that much more excited about team. I was married young, and then my husband at the time approached me asking for a divorce. It was not my choice. I was disinterested in that path. And I was so fortunate that at the time I had already joined the Tuesday group. And it wasn't actually, it was interesting. It took me a bit to bring it to the group. I was getting support in different ways, some unhelpful. I actually had a counselor at the time who was not team trained, whose whole approach with me was listening, which was sweet, but and helpful, I think, to some degree, but also just lots of advice giving. The example that always came to mind for me is she just kept telling me like how I should re-engage socially, and she would pick things that actually weren't feeling very connected to me at the time. The one she kept pushing on was I needed to go back to church. Um, I had been raised very active in a church family, was not active in a church family at that phase of my life. And it was just so advicey. It did exactly what David predicts, which is when you just tell people what to do, it just forces our brain to like come up with all the reasons why that was not a good fit for me. And it was very off-putting to me. She kept raising it kind of unsolicited. So I finally, in the Tuesday group, what I brought to them about the divorce was the negotiations around money, which were really hard for me. I felt so unsure of like what I deserved and really nervous about asking even for what the law told me I was entitled to. I was like kind of terrified to like ask that be met. And so we did some great mood log work about my feelings and thoughts about what I was entitled to and what it meant to stand up for myself. And it was so helpful, like totally shifted my ability to just advocate for myself and just to really justified by the law way, which in retrospect feels funny that I needed so much help
Right.
to just ask what was asked of me. But yeah, it really turned things around. And then the group was also that's when I just got close as friends with a lot of these people in the group too, because it's such a lovely group of humans. And it was actually not long after that then that I think because of that vulnerability and the connections made, it wasn't too long after that I had this amazing opportunity to help start Feeling Good Institute. More Katz was in the group at the time, and Jill Levitt was in the group at the time. The three of us now kind of are the primary leaders of Feeling Good Institute, though we have a big leadership team. And Maor had said right around that time, David had always had a vision that someone would take the risk to actually start an institute. That was his word, where clients could come and find a bunch of people trained in his methods. And prior to that, it didn't exist, which is hard to believe because now there's lots of places you can go and find TEAM-CBT therapists. But this was the first. And so Maor said he was willing to kind of take the risk. And initially he's like, I'll just get a space and I'll pay the rent and I'll ask people to contribute and we'll see what happens. And so it started very casually, but it started with this vision that we want clients to be able to find good therapy. And then we wanted to help therapists get better at it. We wanted to create a path for people to grow in their skills, and then to be able to spread it so that you didn't have to live in the Bay Area in California in the USA to be able to access TEAM-CBT. And so it's been such a fun journey that started out of that Tuesday group to get to be part of watching what has really grown now, not only Feeling Good Institute providing services all across, Canada and the US and in Israel, but also supporting others who've started, clinics and spaces where folks can access services and watching therapists get better. And so, Angela, others might not. I actually don't do as much clinical work myself now because I do a lot of training of other therapists and supporting them in their development. So it's just been such a journey that started with those initial experiences of me being sold personally and being excited and seeing how it really works.
Yeah, that I think once you see how it works, that kind of sells you. And one
Yeah.
thing I've always been, thinking about when we started this whole series, along with Daniel, was we get excited about it, so it comes off as sales pitchy, but it's not intended to be. It's just we want people to understand that it's kind of been swept under the rug a little bit. We thinking like
Yeah.
Psychology Today and some of these platforms, and you can pick ACT and you can pick DBT and you can pick
Hmm.
Gottman, but there's no
Hmm.
TEAM-CBT listed on most of these
Yeah.
places. So hoping, that some of these stories will help realize some of that awareness.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah. And we also need people to get excited about doing more research, and that'll help too.
yeah.
We have some, but
Mhm.
that's
Yeah.
part of what I'm hoping that our, next generations of therapists who are excited about team are, have the energy to help us continue research we've been doing with David Burns, and trying, because more research to put behind what exists already will also help more people.
Yeah,
So
I
really, really embrace it.
agree with that. Well, we're running out of time, so we're going to ask our last
Oh,
question, which we ask of
okay.
everyone, and that is,
Yeah.
if all the therapists and clinicians in the world were listening, and maybe even professors, and what's
Mm.
one thing about team you'd like them to know?
Um, I would want them to know that it's fun. That's goofy that that's
I
what
like
comes to mind, but
that.
it really is fun. I have fun with my clients doing team. I mean, sometimes it's hard and it's sad too, of
Hmm.
course, but it's also so empowering to try new things and to be able to laugh at ourselves and to find finding enlightenment where we're like able to take ourselves less seriously is fun. And so, and then a lot of the methods are fun. We know that, right? They can be silly, they can be serious, but there's a fun spirit to it. And so I think people who are looking for some levity at times in the hard work that is helping people who are suffering might find team exciting.
Well, thank you so much for being here today. It was
Yeah.
really a pleasure to have you on and listen
Yeah.
to your story and your team journey.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
All right. Bye bye, everyone.
Okay, take care.